Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to Better Life discussion. My name is Marcia Trajano, and with me is Yuri Castro, who joins me today to explore a very difficult topic, right, Yuri? Complicated grief and deep depression. And we're going to do this through the lens of spiritist psychology. And I just wanted to say, Yuri, and thank you for being here with me today. But in my mind, grief is the heart's, how shall I say, the natural language of both love and loss. And from that language, from that conversation, sometimes grief may be, may stay with us too long, too loudly, right? This voice that screams at us, or even we could say too darkly, turning what should be this journey that all of us inevitably will have to take into what feels like a trap. So today, Yuri, I would like for us to explore this world of complicated grief as this, this place where mourning stops healing, and it truly is a journey of hurting. Yuri, how you doing? And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for having me once again. It's always an honor to be here and discussing all these important topics with the bridge of psychology and spirituality. And today is no different. I think, as you mentioned already, grief is it's a very difficult one to talk about. So
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yes. So what am I thinking? I'm thinking that when we start to blend insights from, say, Spiritist author Emmanuel, Joanna DeAngelis, Carl Gustav Jung, and modern psychotherapy, right? We start to learn that these profound states of sorrow can perhaps be addressed, and on one hand, but how therapy, self reflection, and spiritual practices, spiritual tools available can be instrumental in helping all of us restore our sense of hope, our sense of joy. And so, Yuri, my thoughts today is that we talk about perhaps the notion of how grief sometimes, not all the times, can paralyze us, right? This is the, as I mentioned, this feeling that is a trap, and it's just shackling us, imprisoning us, paralyzing us, on one hand, but also how perhaps your knowledge of spiritism, as it is integrated with psychology and spirituality in general, as well as our personal growth, can help us address this period that is quite complicated, right? And maybe we can wrap up today with offering some tools, some practice for healing, right? Healing from this lingering sorrow, this deep sense of loss and sadness. Does this make sense? And if so, shall we get started?
Absolutely, absolutely, it does make sense, and I think it's a very good roadmap for our conversation today because, as I mentioned before as well, this is it's a very difficult topic, and I know it resonates with a lot of people out there listening or viewing us that have gone through grief, that have gone through the loss of a loved one. So yeah, I say it's a good point to for us to start. Yes.
Yeah, and to me, the baseline of my thoughts is that, and I'm going to almost like put air quote. I hate air quotes, yet I keep using. So, anyways, forgive me. Air quotes here. Normal mourning, and I say normal because what is normal, right? But normal mourning should be considered from a baseline perspective as a transformative experience, right? What are we talking about? Is the sense that all of us will have to confront loss, and how mourning allows that integration within ourselves of loss. And but when we talk about complicated grief, which for me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the definition of that. But to me, complicated grief is just a period of mourning that pushes us to not transform, on the opposite, to make us stagnant, right? And that is usually linked to trauma, or in many cases, unresolved sense of guilt, or in my opinion as a spiritist, right, this too strong of an attachment to the person. How could I
Yeah.
lose my father, my mother, my sibling? So that sense of you belong to me, which is a misnomer at a minimum. So can we talk a little bit of what is complicated grief, so that we can understand what does it do and why perhaps does it do?
Of course, yeah, and I guess from the psychological standpoint, as you're saying, like more of a technical
Mhm.
definition or technical term, it's interesting because grief in itself, or bereavement, as we also call in psychology, up until the DSM-5 TR, the revision to the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorder. So this is
Mhm.
what psychologists, psychiatrists, we all use that in the United States to diagnose somebody with, let's say, major depressive disorder, social anxiety disorder. Everything is in the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 TR, which is the revised version, came out a couple of years ago only, and it's the first DSM ever. So this is decades of these diagnostic manual,
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
first one ever to have a specific diagnosis for grief.
Wow. I did not know that.
There you
So
go.
it's
So
it's
first
very
one.
interesting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, they the way they go about this is, they have these task forces. They have all these like professionals researching, and then every couple of like every 10, 15 years, they revise it and they release it either an updated version, or they release a new one. So before this
Uh-huh.
one was 2013 that we had the DSM-5. So we're talking now 13 years ago, and
Yeah.
4 years ago they revised it. So it's interesting because now research is showing how many people are actually suffering from that, to the point where now it's a standalone condition. It's a standalone disorder, and up until this point, it was not. It was sort of like mixed in other conditions. It wasn't treated as such, but now
Yeah.
there's something called prolonged grief disorder in the
Yeah.
DSM-5 TR. So it's something that is diagnosable, we can even say. And I think
Yeah.
that shows a lot of the need for the need that the population is displaying, and how they are now able to categorize specific symptoms of grief. As we already mentioned, it's something that is very complicated and hard, but very specific symptoms of that.
Yeah. And I'm just out of curiosity, what do you think is you already mentioned, it just express or reflects the large number of people suffering. Therefore, it gained its own category, right? Of in the new updated version.
Yeah.
But what do you think maybe prompted, in addition to the large number of people, this change?
So usually when they start a diagnosis like that, is because they start to see that it's something on its own. So before, let's say, for instance, I'll give you another example: autism spectrum disorder. Now it's a
Yeah,
spectrum
yeah,
disorder, or since 2013, because they were seeing there were a lot of congruent factors with three different disorders. So they said, you know what? Why have three? Let's combine into a spectrum and do only one. So they
yeah,
they always revise the category, because the DSM-5 is a categorical approach, and I don't want to be too technical here, but it's a categorical approach to mental health disorders, and like prolonged grief is one that I think it was prompted, of course, by research and by the population in general. If you also think about the pandemic, even a lot of people
yeah,
dying
yeah.
from the pandemic, so we're seeing more grief. We're
Mhm.
seeing more of these symptoms, but now they have a diagnosis. Now we have a specific symptoms that have
Yeah,
a criteria that whenever we professionals of mental health professionals, we must go through in order to diagnose somebody with that.
yeah. Speaking of pandemic, and this is a personal example, I know someone very dear to my family, um, Yuri, who lost his mother, right, during the pandemic, and he kept losing. And the total number of people that he lost during the pandemic, and I believe it was all in the course of 1 year, was 18 people that he personally, very close to him, like his mother. And then there was the 19th. And the proverbial, that's the last straw. Right.
That broke
It
the
was,
camel's back.
yes, it really was that last person, number 19th, that actually had a heart attack. He was quite young. He had a heart attack, and he passed away at night, sleeping, if you will. And that completely just was a slap in this person's face, and it was quite difficult for him to come back, or, resurface from all the grief, because it just compounded all the loss. And I can see that with the pandemic, with
Yeah,
so many disincarnating, right?
because there is a lot of if we think about it, right? So there is um there's there's death of every cause, there's diseases, heart conditions, a lot of cardiovascular. There's a lot of these things
Yeah,
that happen, but on top of that, you add something like the pandemic. It accelerated the deaths of a lot
yeah,
of the physical death of a lot of people.
yeah.
So therefore, we see
Important
a
to
lot
say
of that.
that, right? Physical
Yeah,
death. It's
physical one. Yeah, here we can say that. So it's the physical death of of a lot of people out there, and I guess like if it didn't happen to a person in their family, they definitely know somebody who died
yeah, yeah,
during the pandemic. So it's I feel like this is something that also prompted professionals in that sense, because it's
yeah,
interestingly, when we think of grief, we think of somebody suffering a lot. It's almost like it has a flair for depression. If you think about
yeah,
somebody that's very depressed, very sad, and you say, oh, they're grieving. Interestingly, here's another point for you as well, another
yeah,
curiosity.
yeah.
Um, Prolonged grief disorder is not in the depressive disorders. It's not in the category of depressive disorders. It's in the category of trauma related disorders. So it's a
Ah,
trauma
can you talk more
disorder,
about it?
just like
Yeah,
PTSD, adjustment
yeah,
disorder,
yeah.
etc.
So prolonged, tell me again, what is the real title? And
Prolonged
yeah, go ahead.
grief disorder. Prolonged
So
grief disorder.
disorder. Yeah, so it is a grief and it's prolonged, but interesting enough, it has a correlation to PTSD, I guess.
Yeah, not a correlation. It's under the same category
Okay,
of
got it.
acute stress disorder, PTSD, and adjustment disorder, which are trauma related disorders. So it's a traumatic event to the point where uh, the person grieves for a
Yeah.
prolonged period of time. For instance, for for adults, it's 12 months, and for
Mhm.
children, is the death has to have occurred at least in children and adolescents within 6 months. So if you
Mhm.
have the symptoms there and the death was less than 12 months ago for the adult or less than 6 months ago for the child, and there's sufficient disruption, and we can go over symptoms here, but anyhow,
Yeah.
then there's definitely a case for that diagnosis.
Yeah. So we talk about diagnosis, we talk about updates and how mental health as a field, right, is looking at things such as grief, which is really good to hear. I believe that there is a development if we recognize grief, and we also important this touch point that you said, Yuri, that it's although in our, at least in mine, when we talk about grief, there is this natural, it is depression. And you said, no, it's really a disorder that it's in the same
It's a trauma.
category, right, of trauma, PTSD, acute distress disorder, etc. And I'm just wanted to think about it from a perspective. I already mentioned that it feels like to me, the untrained eye here, is this stagnation and just this, this something that doesn't move anymore. And For many, it may be unresolved guilt, right? I had something that I needed to do, and oh, I no longer have that opportunity. But can you tell a little bit about what are the symptoms, perhaps, and what are not just symptoms, but how does it impact one's life? When should we,
Yeah,
as parents, as friends, as perhaps children, how can we look at it and say, hey, so and so
yeah,
may be going through this. I need to make sure that he or she gets some help.
absolutely. So, for instance, for prolonged grief disorder, we can think of so some of the symptoms you asked. So identity disruption is one of them, and you already
Mhm.
mentioned that in the introduction as about like there's this identity piece there. So there's identity disruption. So like, oh, part of me has died with the person.
Mhm. Yeah,
There's also extreme avoidance of any reminders that the person has died or any reminders of the person. There's this reported intense emotional pain. There's difficulty reintegrating or reinstating oneself into relationships, into activities.
hmm,
Sometimes emotional numbness, again, and you already mentioned the stagnation and things like that. So we see that in the DSM-5 in clinical psychology
yeah,
and psychiatry as well. Intense loneliness, and the last one, if I remember correctly, is feeling that life is meaningless.
yeah,
So
yeah.
having that sense of now my life is meaningless since the person died and all of that. So there's this, as you can see, all these symptoms would paint a picture of somebody who's very, very sad. So it's say, oh, that
Yeah,
person is depressed. In fact, they're traumatized
yeah,
if you think
yeah.
about it. So it's a more accurate description that the death actually traumatized that person to the point where now they're having prolonged grief disorder, or they meet criteria for prolonged grief
Mhm.
disorder. And it's interesting here, Marcia, that the
Yeah,
DSM-5 also talks about that these symptoms, so like the duration and severity of bereavement reaction, or of the grief, clearly exceeds expected social norms, cultural norms, and even religious norms. So it has
mhm.
to go beyond that. And I think that's an interesting piece too.
It is because if you think in terms of and I'm just going to be broad. I worked many years ago with somebody from the Philippines, right? And it was very interesting because after she experienced the loss of a loved one in the Philippines, as she worked in the U.S. She she had outward like something that she wore, as in, socially speaking, everybody could see she was mourning, she was grieving. And it was very interesting because it was a month that she did that. Now, when my mom passed, uh, my dad, Yuri, everything you said about those symptoms, my father went through, right? He did not want to turn on the lights or have people come and have dinners with him, or he did not want to listen to music. It was this, let me go into my cocoon of mourning my wife. And he did that for almost a full year. It was perhaps 11 months of that. So it's just very interesting that for him he had to go through this, and he survived, right? I thought he would not actually, but he survived, which is good, which leads us to this discussion of what does grief mean, perhaps, right? What is, can we see a positive
Hmm.
aspect to this mourning, this period of mourning, and the spirit that will lead you to a sadness, to being very reflective, to be isolated even. What are your thoughts? Can you maybe share some of your experience with us?
Yeah, of course. I mean, one of the things, and you mentioned, thank you for sharing about your parents, because one of the things that I think these talks are very good for is letting people know that others have suffered as well. There's a lot of people going through these things out there, so creating this sense of, knowledge and helping people understand and destigmatize a lot of these symptoms and
Mm,
conditions. And I think that's
yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah.
And to answer your question, I do think that even in grief, if we think about prolonged grief or prolonged bereavement, of course, with every sort of challenge, let's put it very mildly here, with every challenge that we face in our lives, every disruption of any sort, I think that there's always opportunity for growth. There's always an
Yes.
opportunity for learning, and there's always something that we must inspect and see, why is this affecting me in this way. So I think with grief is no different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a topic that I think you hit the nail in the head when we talk about just by sharing experience we help destigmatize some, and it feels to me that the topic of grief that we're doing this series in different aspects of grieving, of law, losing some aspects of one's identity, but it is important to also say whenever we talk about death, it's like, whoa, too macabre for me. I don't want to hear.
Hmm.
I don't want to talk about it. But it's important for us to perhaps remove that
Yeah,
sense of a taboo topic that we all experience, and it's not easy for everybody. Therefore, talking about it will help, right?
absolutely. I mean, and talking about will help, and if we bring the spiritual aspect
Yeah.
of it as well,
Yeah. So
then we
let's
def
go there. Let's go
yeah.
about the spiritual aspect because I mentioned Emmanuel, the spirit can talk. Spirit author Emmanuel, right? When he talks about that, he brings to us this idea that grief, right? The going through grief without going through a period of reflection, which is that journey inward, or any type of going through loss without those self awareness, a period of paying attention. It really leaves us in the mode of I haven't learned, therefore it will be repeated in a similar event, right? So I think it's important for us to understand that there is a lesson to be learned in each one of those losses that we face, but we are the ones that bring the awareness, the knowledge, this education, if you will, from inside out, right? So the question for you, maybe, unless you want to add to that, but is how do you think, Yuri, that prolonged mourning, right? I'm not talking about grief. I'm talking mourning, right? Can it disconnect us from life or even from ourselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely can. I think, and a lot of the times that's what we see: people disconnecting
Mhm.
from themselves, disconnecting from their community, disconnecting from their lives. So
Yeah,
I think that that's a that's an important piece where spiritism can help a lot, and we bring the spiritual aspect of understanding that that was the death of a material
yeah,
body, and
yeah,
it's the death that we have all gone through many times before, and will continue to go many times again, and that the spirit lives on.
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like that's an important piece as well, understanding how the immortality of the soul sort of connects and relates with this, so we can all understand that um, the person is really not dead. They're not really dead per se.
yeah,
Their body has died,
yeah,
but the person lives on. And I think that is such a beautiful and consoling aspect that can help these people who are grieving, who are in
yeah,
prolonged mourning, get back to their own selves, get back into their lives. I don't know.
yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was even going to ask you, can you share here? For those of you who may be joining us for the very first time, who never read anything in the spiritual aspects of what we're talking about, Yuri, can you share what is, in a very high level, if you will, sense of what does it mean? I am living, I'm an immortal soul, right? And poof, I have something, a car hits me, I have a heart attack, whatever. I am gone tomorrow, and it's sudden, and all of those around me are going to suffer. I'm not saying that I hope they do, but the suffering just means there was a connection there. But how can learning that yes, this body is dead, but not the spirit. How can, for those who never really read or get very used to this concept, how does it console? Because it does to me, but maybe you could explain with your own words, Yuri.
Yeah, I think that one thing that if we think about, I think what I like to say is that spiritism killed death
Yes,
in a way.
good point. Yeah,
So spiritism killed death because we see death itself
yeah,
as something completely different, and it's not making it anything light of death. Not, it's not making it like something that's I mean, we still suffer with whenever we're separated physically from people, even if they go somewhere else. If you love somebody, they go travel to another country, they stay there for a while. You miss them, but they're alive, they're there, but you miss them. So there is that longing for the person, even the physical presence of the person. I think what death does, it's kind of like sever that physical tie necessarily, and it can bring a lot of despair. But what spiritism does so well is, like you said, to console, because we understand that one, the person did not actually die. So I think it ends the finality of death. That's what I like to say as well,
yeah, yeah,
because death there's a finality to it, like, oh, this is it, we're done, we only live one life. If we go through life thinking about that, then death can carry a much heavier um meaning, perhaps to the point where it can become something psychological and pathological, even that can influence your life. But
yeah,
whenever we see life through the lens of immortality, okay, my
yeah.
soul is immortal, Marcia's soul is immortal.
Hmm.
If one of us goes tomorrow, and we end up dying, our body dies, we're gonna still be alive. And the thing
Yeah,
is, here's a little like added piece for those who are just starting to get to know a little bit of spiritism.
yeah,
There's still ways that you can connect with that person, and this is something that brings that consolation through faith, through through the rational means and the explanations and all those things. And I think that's such a beautiful piece that we have, that brings this consoling aspect to our own lives by ending what we up until now perhaps thought, or in previous lives perhaps we thought it that way, or for those who still think,
yeah.
brings to the end the finality of death.
Yeah. So back to beyond the consoling message of, and it doesn't have to be spiritism, right? It can be any
Yeah.
spiritualistic belief systems, or any of the understanding or acceptance of the concept of reincarnation. But I was going to just ask you, what are your thoughts from the perspective that grief has a spiritual purpose, even when it is prolonged and painful? Can you tell us about what is that spiritual purpose of grief?
I think a lot of the times it helps with the awakening of the
Mm,
consciousness, the awakening of the person to something that either they didn't know was there, or they have been ignoring for too long. So I think
yeah,
it forces the person to look inward, to really like start to find meaning and find other avenues of thought that up until that point were not fulfilling enough.
yeah,
And I think that's what we can call like a turning point, that I
yeah.
think happens whenever grief is there, or prolonged bereavement.
Yeah. No, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So when we talk about we talked about uh, the changes, recent changes to the categories of pathologies, I guess you would say, right? Where now we have prolonged grief as a category that is now understood, accepted, and be in use by those who are in the mental health
Yeah,
discipline. But what are the psychological dimensions of prolonged grief? And I'm just trying to think if you see any of the different uh, dimensions from your perspective, and I can be cognitive, behavioral interventions that is required. What is, for example, some types of grief therapy that can help us reframe our lost narratives, including that spiritist view of the soul remains. There's no death. And as you're talking about death just a minute ago, I'm gonna send a plug to a book that was actually written the final years of the 19th century. And yes, you heard me right. So 1898, 99, the French writer Léon Denis wrote a book with I just love the title, right? After Death. It is quite a thick book. It's a beautiful, very easy to read book with 50 chapters, and the chapters sometimes are quite small, as in one page long, but he really brings a very broad view of this notion of surviving the physical death, right? Which is what happens
yeah,
after the instance. So for anybody plugged to this book, it's a wonderful book, by the way. But back to the question, what are
yeah.
some of the dimensions that we can talk here, Yuri?
Well, again, I think there's, as you mentioned already, there's the cognitive piece, emotional piece. I feel like one of the biggest ones that we see in the clinical setting is emotional numbness,
Yeah,
person feeling very numb, having this, this difficulty reintegrating into their own lives. So
yeah,
a lot of therapies or a lot of, psychological approaches, they will focus on reintegrating the person and having them sort of like get their lives back on track because,
yeah,
as you kindly offered your father's story there, like it's like it's almost like the life either deviates from the path he was taking or it comes to a complete halt.
yeah,
But life goes on, and when I mean life, the person that stayed behind in the body and not the one
yeah,
who passed, for them life goes on still. There's a lot of things that need to be done, and their
yeah,
life will continue, but they fight back, they struggle, they just can't seem to move on. And that's one of the, I guess,
mm,
the cognitive slash emotional pieces of this. This, there's also the emotional, intense emotional pain. So I think this is something too that some therapies will approach. And the acceptance piece, that is
mm,
something that we have: acceptance and commitment therapy. We have other types of therapy that will work on acceptance, because for
yeah,
people with prolonged grief, a lot of the times, I'd say more often than not, honestly, they don't accept that the person has
hmm.
passed. Like they
There's
some
a
of them continue
resistance,
to,
right? Yeah.
there's a big pushback, and a
Mm,
lot of them even continue to do things as if the person was physically still there, or if the person was going to is still going to physically eat that meal they're preparing for two again instead of just
yeah.
one, because now there's only one in the house, etc. So there's a lot of pushback and resistance there. So that's yet another facet or dimension.
Yeah. No, this is very good, right? What are some perhaps some exercises, or and I'm talking about not just therapy, but are there anything that we could offer for those of us who are going through grief in general, but also prolonged grief?
I may be biased, but I would say any book by Leon Denis, any book
Yeah.
by Allan Kardec, Emmanuel, Joanna de Angelis, etc., etc. I feel like literature, spiritist literature particularly,
Yeah.
brings something different to a lot of
Yeah.
people who perhaps don't have contact with that. So whenever you're offering something like that, you're helping the person. A lot of the times as well, I want to say that too, just be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have to even say anything. You don't have to try to console them, convince them, push them to go on. A lot of the times, the best thing that the person can do for someone else who's going through this is just physically being there for them, which gives the
Yeah.
message like, I'm here for you. You're not alone.
Yeah. So empathy, right? Not
Yeah,
just
that
compassion, but
generates
empathetic, being there. I'm there. I got you.
silence is very powerful. It is something that therapists know. A lot of therapists out there will agree with me. Silence is very powerful.
Yeah.
And with silence, and when I say silence, you have to like assume that there's at least two people in the
Yeah.
room. So whenever we're in, like, even if you're sitting in silence with someone, or let's say it's a loved one that you're seeing that's suffering, you're there next to them, even in silence can already mean a lot for them. So don't take that for granted. I guess that's a message or an exercise I recommend.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Right. So I don't know, because you talked about suffering, right? It is a journey that it's painful, and when we talk about grieving in general, you mentioned the beginning of our conversation, there is an expected sense of sadness, right? And can we talk about it? What does it mean to be depressed, right? If the sadness is a basic emotion. The depression and pathological depressions are that just a crying soul, right? This need to resolve a conflict, but the inability to address it. So I'm just wondering, how can we reconnect, right, with, and I'm talking about not just the feeling and sadness, depression, prolonged grief, etc. But how can we reconnect that
Yeah.
to its positive aspects to it, which is what is at the other side of this process?
A lot of people will tell you, and I think that I want to share that experience as well because I've heard that from more than one person over the years
Mm,
doing spiritist talks.
mm,
There is a lot of people that say, if that hasn't happened, I would not have found this, and I would not have found this source of knowledge, or all of these things that now have changed my view of everything in a way
yeah,
for the good.
yeah,
That's why I mentioned with every sort of challenge, with every crisis comes an opportunity. And I think with whenever somebody's going through that's a big opportunity to look to the things that will truly explain and fulfill that aching soul.
yeah,
And it is, like I said, you think of somebody who's very sad, they have, bereavements, and again, it's normal. We feel that it's normal. It only becomes a problem. That's why the DSM is very clear with that. Whenever it's out of proportion, like, one in 2 words or 3 words, out of proportion, because, and there's more technical language, but the main thing is like when it's out of proportion.
yeah,
If something happened, I'm feeling sad, very very sad, 1 or 2 days, and then it goes away. That's not depression necessarily. I was just feeling very sad. But
yeah,
with grief, what we see is a lot of these symptoms and a lot of these conditions that they will just not go away. So it is always an opportunity to look and see, how can I move on now? How can I be resilient in the face of this very harsh challenge? Because losing someone is a harsh challenge, is something that rocks anybody. like
yeah,
like that's why I make the analogy of somebody travels to another city and you don't see them for a couple of days. We feel pain. We feel like, oh, I wish you were here.
yeah, yeah,
you know
yeah. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let's finalize our conversation with some, I don't know, some approaches that we can talk about, therapeutic approaches. You already mentioned, right? But are there medications, therapies, exercises, types of support group, journaling, right? Or what are the things, in your opinion, that can help us uh, go through this process in a better way, or more prepared to
Yeah,
it?
I think you mentioned a few things already. The journaling is a great one as well.
Mm,
Prayer, that's another great, great one as well, even more than we'd imagine. Support groups, and also, of course, finding professional help if needed, because a lot of the times it will be needed, even if for a short period, but it's needed to find professional help because people have been trained to help you with that. So
mm,
I mean, I already mentioned a couple of things, but I guess there's no, it's not like a cake recipe. Like, it's just with each person is going to be very unique, and there's a lot of different therapies that help out there. But for some people, it's going to be reintegrating into society, having a support group, journaling. For others, it's going to be more about honoring the person that passed, or having some sort of ritual. Some people need some sort of like ritual to like to help them move on. It's going to
mhm.
be very unique. It's very hard to give a sort of like a general tip or a general
Sure.
approach
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah.
So it's my biggest thing is, if it's becoming too much, seek professional help, because there is medication, there is therapies, but that's why we have professionals that are there to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live in a day and age that it's so plentiful, and so there is an availability of professional help, right?
Yeah,
If we went back maybe even just 50 years ago, Yuri, I can imagine there was a certain taboo for, oh, I'm sad, I'm going to seek help. And the social response would be, oh, come on, get over it, right?
yeah,
Go
yeah.
take a
It's
cold shower, and or drink a shot of whiskey. I don't know. I'm just joking here, but it was
yeah,
very, brushed to the side. And so it's good, as we start to wrap up our conversation, to understand all the advances in availability of professional help, of therapies, of different types of approaches, but also that acceptance that we're social biological beings, but we are emotional beings. We
yeah,
suffer, and that emotional side of who we are really needs to be taken care. Taking, just there's a TLC, right? Tender love and care
yeah.
for who we are and how we're going through this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm glad the stigma is much much better now, but definitely
Hmm. Hmm.
still out there. But the thing
Yeah,
is, we all need help. That's it. Like, we
yeah,
all, and we
yeah,
can help. We can get help in different ways as well. And that's what I
yeah.
wanted to highlight too. Like, we're all very unique in that sense. There's so many options for, so just find the help that fits you.
I really appreciate that. In fact, I think the cookie cutter recipe, do this and you get better, as good as it may be for us. Like, oh, just give me whatever. But it's the sense that we are unique
Yeah,
as snowflakes, right? Each one of us have a certain structure, certain beauty, a certain sense of need that makes us very, very much different in how we heal those deep wounds.
well said.
Anyways, I just wanted to say we are almost at time. So, is there any final words, Yuri, that you would like to just, about this topic that you could share with all of us here?
I guess for people going through grief, understand you're not alone, and finding the spark of divinity that lives within you, because God lives within all of us.
Yeah, yeah, love it. So, to me, I would say grief is somehow It's my natural compass, right? My heart's compass, almost we could say. It is individual, is it is unique, but it is how we beat and how we need that validation that we are not alone. So as we're going through grief, any one of us,
Yeah.
let us think and seek help so that when we go through loss, that we could also look for loss with understanding, right? And there are many reasons, no judgment here, but there are many reasons why we may become stagnant, that we suffer prolonged grief, right? But let's look at all the ways that we can restore ourselves, we can restore our balance, and we restore a sense of direction again. And I guess the last thought that comes to my mind is that mourning is not a weakness, right? It is a feeling of sorrow, a feeling of missing that person
Yeah.
that you had close by, and but it's also a call, right, for support. So let us look at it like it's I'm suffering and I'm suffering so hard. Seek help. Help is there, right? And it will help us navigate and change the narrative of what life is, what death is. Wow, we are
Yeah.
not alone, never alone in this
Ever.
journey. Yeah. But anyways, thank you so much, Yuri. I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate all of us who are together in the weekly psychology and spirituality talks. They're based on the works by Joanna De Angelis, and I really appreciate you, Yuri. I appreciate all of us in this community together learning about psychology and spirituality. But of course, I also appreciate our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AME Brazil, known as the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. I want to say thank you and until next time. So long, everyone.
Thank you.